Good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm George Hidalgo, Club President, and thanks for joining us today. So my opening message today is about the importance of strategic planning. Now, our club board appointed 3 task forces to help take a strategic look at our membership and our club's governance. Now, 2 of those task forces present reports to our club board on Monday night, and we will be reporting on their recommendations in the coming weeks. And we'll also look at seeking your feedback before we finalize our governance plan. So during this pandemic, we've been looking at the entire structure of Rotary and our Rotary Club to see what we can do to make it better. So we do have a membership retention engagement task force that will present their recommendations at our board meeting in April. So again, strategic planning will strengthen our club and keep us vibrant as we recover from the pandemic. You'll see that they're working on ways to make even stronger connections when we can be back together in person. And considering the Dane County order that went out, looks like it may be sooner than anticipated. So that's fantastic news. So with that, we'll go to our opening music. Joe Luinis will start us out by playing America the Beautiful on his cello. Following Joe, we will have a feature song, Moon River, sung by Heidi Frankson with Elaine Mishler on piano. So I'm pleased to announce we are introducing 3 new members today. So let's start with Jason Fields, who has been loaned the classification of Associations, Business and Professional, and is president of the Madison Region Economic Partnership. Now, prior to joining MatRep, he was a Wisconsin State Legislature. Ron Luskin is his sponsor. Now, Jason is native of Milwaukee and lives there with his wife, Latasha, on North 55th Street. Now, Jason holds a bachelor's degree in business management from Cardinal Stretch University. Now, he has worked as a financial advisor, investment advisor, personal banker, credit union branch manager, and investment banking associate. He has published several books, some of which focus on financial topics for beginners, which I guess could be a lot of us, right? Jason also holds a weekly radio show. He hosts that, The Financial Promise, 30 Minutes of Power with Jason Fields on the largest Christian radio station in Wisconsin. So he is a certified financial education instructor and certified capital raising specialist. Now, our next member is Peter Gray, who has been loaned the classification of business, service, and supplies, and is the owner of Peter Gray Executive Search. Now, his sponsor is also Ron Luskin. Now, Peter was born in Queens, New York, and came to Madison in 2005. So, Peter, I grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens, so we have a lot to talk about. Now, Peter is married to Jennifer Uphoff Gray, and they live in Marathon Drive in Madison. They have 3 teenage children. Peter holds a bachelor's degree in visual and environmental studies from a university that some of you may know of. Let's see. It's called Harvard University. And an MBA degree from another decent school called Columbia Business School. Now, he volunteers for the Boys and Girls Club of Dane County and chairs their annual fundraiser called Move for Boys and Girls Clubs. Now, he has also served on the board for the Wisconsin Bike Federation and is proud to have launched the Free Bikes for Kids in Madison as a founding board chair of the Madison chapter. He enjoys bicycling, playing the guitar, and photography. Now, we have one additional new member today, and that is Kyle Nundorf, who has been loaned the classification of health services and is president of SSM Health, St. Mary's Hospital, Madison. His sponsor is also Ron Luskin. Now, Kyle was born in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and came to Madison December of 2019 with his wife, Elizabeth. They make their home on Killarney Way in Waunakee and have 2 children. Now, Kyle holds a bachelor's degree in health and sports sciences and a master in health administration degree from the University of Oklahoma. So he's a member of the American College of Healthcare Executives. He enjoys spending time with his family, traveling, and sports. Join me in welcoming these 3 new members, and we look forward to meeting them at meetings later this year when it is safe for us to do so. So let's give them a warm round of applause. Let's also thank Ron Luskin for sponsoring these 3 new members today. Outstanding job, Ron. Now, we have a membership subcommittee that continues to seek new members for our club. Charles McLyman chairs our members recruitment subcommittee this year, and he has an announcement. Charles?
Thank you, President George, and good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. This month marks the 1-year anniversary that our community and our club have been forced to change course due to the pandemic. When I agreed to chair our recruitment subcommittee in January of last year, thanks Tim Stadelman, the challenges ahead of us to maintain our status as one of the premier service clubs in Madison and one of the top 10 largest clubs in the world were unforeseen. We have high expectations for our club and for our members. However, being a club of leaders, we view every challenge as an opportunity to connect, grow, and serve alongside other community leaders. Why? Because we believe in the power of Rotary to change lives and to positively impact our community and our world. We collectively as Rotarians are a powerful force for good. I would like to highlight the members who have continued to share the joy of Rotary by recruiting new people to our club or by reconnecting with former members who are ready to come back during the pandemic. From March 1, 2020 to March 1 of 2021, the following members have recruited 1 or more new members: Bob Block, Joanna Burish, Scott Forrester, Bob Grabner, Andrea Kaminsky, Carol Kobe, Ron Luskin, Charles McClymans, Dave Molenhoff, Sandy Morales, Majid Sarmadi, Jenny Serino, John Sims, and Tim Stottleman. 14 people recruited 22 new or returning members over the past year throughout the pandemic. And while these numbers may seem underwhelming compared to past performance, I want to sincerely thank and congratulate everyone who has been making the effort to connect new members to our club and introduce them to the joy and benefits of Rotary. Let's give them a big round of Rotary applause. And I'd like to highlight one member in particular who, if we were giving a pandemic recruiting award, would win it. And that member is Ron Luskin. Over the past year, Ron has introduced 7, count them, 7 new members into our club. I asked Ron to comment on how he had been so successful at sharing the joy of Rotary, and Ron says, quote, "I thoroughly enjoy my Rotary experience. Accordingly, I'm often thinking about wanting to share it with others in my orbit who I think would benefit from Rotary membership, as have I. So frequently, I'm introducing Rotary to others and then cultivating them over time until they may be ready to join. Just this morning, I sent 2 prospective members the link to today's meeting because I thought the speaker would be of interest to them. Who says you can't recruit people to Rotary during a pandemic?" Ron, along with the other Rotarians who have continued to keep our recruitment efforts top of mind, have proven that we can and must continually introduce new people to the many benefits of Rotary. So for those of you who don't see your name on the recruiter list today, I have both good news and a challenge to offer. The good news is we still have 4 months until the end of the Rotary year to recruit new members to count in this Rotary year. The recruitment task force and the club's new strategic plan has challenged our club to recruit 25 more new members between now and June 30th of this year. So that's great news. The way I see it, if 14 people can recruit 22 new members in 12 months, then the other 402 remaining members can certainly recruit 25 new members in the next 4 months, right? I'm quite certain that Susan Schmitz, our perennial recruiting champion, probably already has half that number of candidates lined up and waiting in the wings. Seriously, we can do this. I know that when our club and our club members put something top of mind and focus on it, we can accomplish anything together. So please share the joy of Rotary with someone you know every day, starting today. Enthusiasm for our cause is the greatest way to attract others to join our Rotary journey, where we connect, grow, and serve as community leaders. Thank you.
Outstanding message, Charles. Really appreciate that. On to Coffee Connections announcement there. I wanted to make a quick mention that we are holding a virtual Coffee Connection session starting at 11:30 a.m. each week just before our online meeting starts at noon. So no RSVP required, no reservations, and you'll find a link to the Coffee Connection each Wednesday morning in the 7 a.m. email from the Rotary office. So I looked on today before our meeting, and I noticed that 5 Rotarians are on there having, chatting with each other. So it's kind of nice to have that connection, that contact during this pandemic. So we hope to see you at an upcoming Coffee Connection so you can see some of your Rotary friends and make some new friends too. So don't hesitate to do that. With 420-something members, definitely a lot of people that you may not be familiar with. Next announcement is reference Facebook. A quick reminder that thanks to Jennifer Weissman, our club now has a private Facebook page. And we have 101 members, and we encourage additional members. There will be a link in Friday's newsletter so you can sign up. So with spring coming, this Facebook group is a great way to get notifications of small in-person impromptu events while following safety guidelines during the pandemic. So I think it's a great opportunity, again, for members to connect with each other. Now, we have birthdays to celebrate with a bit of humor or wisdom that complements Rotary's mission. We also encourage members to make an age-appropriate gift to the Madison Rotary Foundation, rounded up to 100 for our Club Synergy Scholarship Fund. Well, February 29th is Sandy Geller. March 1st, Eli Van Camp. March 5th, Paul Karch. And Paul mentioned that there's a quote that's usually attributed to Winston Churchill, but that's erroneously attributed to him. And it basically says that Americans are always known for doing the right thing after they've tried several ways of doing it the wrong way. So they'll always do the right thing. So I thought that considering the political things that are, I could say, political climate in our society, it's probably a very appropriate quote to think about it. We always end up doing the right thing. March 6th is Jocelyn Riley. So thanks to our celebrants for their contributions to the Madison Rotary Foundation. Please join me in wishing them a happy birthday. Ellis Waller will play Happy Birthday on the bagpipes. So before I move to members in the news, I have some news to share. Dennis Collin passed away on February 26th after a long battle with cancer. He was 65 years old. Now, Dennis was a business ethics professor at Edgewood College. Now, he was named an honorary member of our Rotary Club in 2017 because of his extensive volunteer efforts in helping create the ethical dilemmas of our annual ethics symposium for high school juniors. So we extend sympathies to Dennis's wife, Diane, and to their family. Other members of the news. Renee Moe and Bob Swords quoted an article about the impact the pandemic is having on local nonprofits. And that's in Business, EZ, February 18th. On to our main program. Our speaker today will be a familiar voice to many of us. Now, Jim Fleming has worked with Wisconsin Public Radio for 50 years. So while he has hosted many classical music programs, he loves combining his interests in the classics with his interest in discussing the arts. His arts interviews were a regular feature of the classical music programs Prelude and Sunday Morning with Jim Fleming. Now, for more than 40 years, he has been a reader for Chapter a Day, a program which brings the best of literature to radio. So now, during his years at Wisconsin Public Radio, he held a number of management positions, including music director and associate director program manager, overseeing Wisconsin Public Radio's programming through much of the 1980s. So in 1990, he joined the national production team of To the Best of My Knowledge, where he continued to work as host until 2013. So he continues to read for a chapter a day. We look forward to the presentation, Jim, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking to us today. Now, I also wanted to mention that we will have a live Q&A with Jim Fleming immediately following today's presentation. Now, you can find the link to Zoom Q&A in this morning's email from the Rotary office or in today's YouTube chat. Let's welcome Jim to our virtual podium. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me to share part of your day. I've spent a good part of my life in small rooms by myself, talking to people I couldn't see, but this is a new one on me. You can see me. Pandemic has changed a lot of things. In some ways, but not others. I've been sheltering at home, listening to podcasts while taking long walks. The latest is a series of lectures by the Yale historian David Blight on the Civil War and Reconstruction. Just as I'm learning about American history now, one of my first jobs when I worked at WHA in the late 1960s was to introduce lectures from UW professors. I learned about Russian history from Mike Petrovich, and I got some understanding of constitutional law from Willard Hurst at about the same time. I walked into WHA by chance. I was meeting with a friend. He was going to audition for an announcing job at WHA. I said, well, I'll go along. So I went over there. I got the job and he didn't. Changed my life forever. Wisconsin Public Radio wasn't known by that name then. It was the Wisconsin State Broadcasting Service. And there were 8 stations on the FM dial, 2 on the AM dial. We signed on later than you might expect, 7 in the morning, and stayed on until 11 at night. On the AM stations, in fact, we had to sign off when the sun set because of broadcast restrictions related to how far the AM band signal would travel and interfere with other stations around the country. I've been trying to count the number of staff who were at WHA in those days, and I've come up with 12. I think that's right. 12 full-time staff. Some of you will remember the names. Ken Ost and Cliff Roberts, Roy Vogelman, Jay Fitz, Linda Clauder, Claire Kensler, Carol Cowan, Ralph Johnson, Jim Collins, Don Vagley, Carl Schmidt. They were friendly and welcoming and helpful. I was only 19, but they taught me about radio. And they had fun with each other. They didn't take it too seriously, although, of course, they took the bottom line entirely seriously. But when Carl was reading a chapter-a-day book in the middle of the day, he would sometimes get so involved in it that he would wrap his legs around the legs of the chair and then tip the chair back some and kind of rock back and forth as he was doing his reading. He would forget everything around him. Well, Don, knowing that, Don Vagley, sneaked into the studio one day and tied Carl's shoelaces around the legs of the chair. And you can imagine what happened next. The chair went over backwards, there was a crash. One of the things Carl was really good at was making a new sentence out of one that he had started badly so that it sounded like it was meant to be that way. And I have always imagined that perhaps he incorporated a crash into the story. I hope it belonged there. I think a lot of you knew Don Vagley. He was the pianist for Rotary for many years. He was also the staff organist as well as music director at WHA, but staff organist because they produced daily programs for children, the Wisconsin School of the Air. And Don, as I suppose with many of us when there are things that we have to do, got into the habit of running into the studio at the last minute and leaping up onto the bench of the organ to play the music that would start the show. Carl, knowing this, put a covering of water on the organ bench, held in place by surface tension so it wasn't at all obvious. Don, I'm told, came running to the studio, leapt up onto the bench, and slid off the other end. I have no idea whether he was able to incorporate the sound of that into the sound of the program. Could be. And, even by the time I got there in 1968, one of our daily joys was trying to figure out who would be the first to make Larry Mealer laugh. You'd make faces at him through the glass. It was pretty easy, so even the unfunniest of us could make it happen. WHA was the original station from which Wisconsin Public Radio grew. Some say Wisconsin Heartland of America was where those call letters came from. I don't know about that. It is certainly one of the oldest stations in the nation. And when Harold McCarty was the director from the 1930s through the 1950s at least, and into the 60s, I think, he used to insist that at least once a day we read an announcement that it was the oldest station in the nation. Media historians have some dispute about this. Some say it's not really true. But what is true, and there's no question about this, is that WHA began as a physics experiment in the lab of Earl Terry in Sterling Hall on the Madison campus in 1912. Makes me smile to remember that he knew exactly how long each broadcast day would be, because each day he would have one of his students blow a vacuum tube which was needed to broadcast, and the station would stay on the air as long as that tube lasted before it burned out. It was 9XM in the early days, and by 1917 they were broadcasting talk and music every day, really continuously since that time. Wisconsin Public Radio, as it's now known, has been broadcasting continuously, which at least gives us an argument, a case to be made, that it's the oldest station in the nation. WHA was a set of call letters issued to what had been 9XM in 1922. It was among the 28 stations existing in the United States at the time. That gives us a claim on history as well. There weren't very many. It's one of the reasons it has only 3 letters in its call letters. They were assigned in 1922, and it was very small, of course, then, and it's changed over the years in all except one way. WHA has been, since its inception, devoted to the Wisconsin idea. It's what defines us all. The boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the state. The obligation was to share the knowledge of what the university had to offer with everyone who listened to Wisconsin Public Radio. And I can't tell you the number of people I've talked to over the course of years who said that they remember listening to the programs that were broadcast to their schoolrooms, and the parents of children then too saying they listened to those programs but also to those university lectures, especially if they were in a rural part of Wisconsin where intellectual life was less frequent than it might be in Madison. The people weren't any less smart, it's just that they had fewer opportunities, and Wisconsin Public Radio gave them those opportunities. The service had to be good. By 1967, you remember the Great Society, there was the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, which created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Their real interest was in television, but they weren't taking into account how important radio was and is to the people of Wisconsin. Carl Schmidt had a strong hand in making that happen. He was on the board of people who created National Public Radio. And when it came time for NPR to build its first national news program, its first national programming service, they hired Bill Siemering to be program director and Jack Mitchell to be the producer of ATC. Bill Siemering was quite literally born in the shadow of the WHA transmitter tower in the UW Arboretum. Jack had been public affairs director at WHA in 1968. And the music for that program, written by Don Fagley, the music director at WHA. In fact, though they use a variety of themes now, that one is still there, the one that Don wrote and that everybody knows as the ATC theme. In some ways, because I was at WHA in 1968, 69, and 70, before I left for a few years, That's what I remember the most. And of course, many of you remember those years as well. The Vietnam War protests were going on in Madison. I was newly married in 1970, and I remember very clearly one night when there had been protests all day up and down Bascom Hill. We were housed in Radio Hall, right behind Science Hall on the UW campus, and I had the evening news to prepare. I was the only person at the station other than my engineer, and so I couldn't leave the building, but my wife volunteered to go out and see what was happening and come back and tell me about it. So I stood at the outside door of Radio Hall and waited to see her reappear around the corner of the building, which she did, with each elbow securely held by a deputy sheriff of the Dane County Sheriff's Office. She swears to this day that her feet didn't even touch the ground. Probably true. I have to laugh a little bit at my naivete from those days. I hadn't been doing this very long. I went shortly after that night to a news conference at Bascom Hall with the new chancellor, Ed Young. Mostly I did what every other reporter was doing. I held out my microphone, I listened, I recorded the questions and the answers, and then after it was more or less over, I held out my microphone to Ed. He'd been an old family friend, and it never occurred to me that this was different. And I blurted out a question about his personal view of the war. He looked, I think, a little stunned at the audacity of that, and simply said, "No comment." I got to be a little better as an interviewer in the years to come when I hosted the national program To the Best of Our Knowledge from Wisconsin Public Radio and Public Radio International. But that was years later. That didn't start until 1990. I had left WHA to do alternative service as a conscientious objector to the war. I worked as an aide in a psychiatric hospital in Connecticut and came back to Madison only in 1973. The big changes at WPR came a few years later when Jack Mitchell returned from NPR to take over the service at WHA. What had been a single service airing on all of the stations was now a bigger thing than that. There were 11 or 12 stations by then, I think. It was split into two services, at least in Madison, later as much of the state as we could manage. But in those days, we created the Ideas Network to be a talk service and the Music and News service to have classical music mostly and to have NPR News. That changed almost everything. Not the underlying purpose, of course. We still had the Wisconsin Idea as the basis of it all. But on the Ideas Network, well, talk shows were becoming popular around the country. Tom Clark started the day every day with, I think at that point, 2 hours of morning news and talk with guests, sometimes 3 or 4 in the course of an hour. I started every day as the host of Prelude, the music program on WPR, even though I was also by then program director as well. That change really changed just about everything. It increased the audience, it increased the number of people who knew of us, cared about us, and it increased the number of people who could call and tell me when I'd done something they didn't like. I have vivid memories of not saying spoiler alert when reading the news one morning and announcing that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father. For most of the time I was at WHA, I was a music host, but also host of Chapter Day and, as I said, To the Best of Our Knowledge. That one started in 1990, co-created by the three of us, Ann Strainchamp, Steve Paulson, and I. I was the host until 2014 when Ann took over. So 24 years I did that. It's always interesting to think back to the people you talk to when you're doing a show like that. I remember talking to Colin Powell the year that he was running for the Republican nomination for president, or may have been. I'm not sure anybody ever said that he actually was. I had a wonderful conversation with him, and I was going on, and finally the producer spoke in my ear and said, he has other people he has to go talk to. So I let him go. I had a good time. I had a wonderful conversation with the psychologist Oliver Sacks. A couple of years after that, I was having, again, a very good time, and I was thinking, maybe I could go get a cup of coffee with him when this is done, when he looked directly at me and said, I won't remember you at all when we're done. Well, I was a little bit flummoxed and wondering what I'd said wrong. But he went on to say that he wouldn't remember me because he had no ability, is gone now, to remember faces. He has something called prosopagnosia, which means that he couldn't recognize his family, his friends, or even his own face when he looked in the mirror. Clearly did not have any effect on his intellect. There was a lot of disagreement and a lot of questions about whether we liked better to interview people in person or over the phone. In the studio, you can look them in the eye, even if they won't remember who you are. On the phone, you can look down at your notes during the conversation. In some ways, phone makes it easier to listen carefully to what they're saying, and certainly to take notes. We would talk to them for an hour, 45 minutes, and then edit the tape for broadcast. As I said earlier, I did chapter a day, I think from the very beginning, really certainly since the mid-1970s, a daily half-hour reading from a book. I've done it live occasionally. During the pandemic, I've continued to record, but here it means that I have to turn the furnace off to get rid of the sound of the ventilation. I have to ask my wife to go to the other end of the house, and I have to surround the space I'm in with towels to dampen the sound and kill the echo. A little bit different from using the professional studios at Vilas Hall. There are funny things that happened with chapter as well, some of which you might enjoy. I remember Jay Fitz, who was choosing the books, asked Ken Ost, who was the prime reader, to do Watership Down by Richard Adams. It was a long, long, long book. And in those days, we started at the beginning and read to the end. Only in that case, I remember coming out of the music studio just across the hall from where he was recording and seeing each day that he was looking a little glummer. Well, I understand that after he had done 25 chapters and gotten to the part where the rabbits have finished their first migration and are beginning a new adventure, he said, much more to come, which you'll enjoy when you take the book out of your public library. Finished the story and left the studio. Another thing that you may not realize is that you can only read 12 pages maximum in a half hour, which means 60 pages a week. If you're going to do a book in 3 weeks, that means 180 pages. Just think for a moment about the latest book you read. How many of them are under 180 pages? These days, we edit books, abridge them, to allow us to finish a book in 3 or 4 weeks. I remember Carl reading The Bonfire of the Vanities once, and it going to 8 weeks, but that was unusual. Speaking of Tom Wolfe, he was a great one to read, even if the books were long, because his verbiage sounded like he was speaking, which made it much easier on the reader. There were also some great things about doing that kind of radio, and especially chapter a day. I remember once when my son was in high school, he had been taking Chinese and we wanted to hire a tutor. The one we found, I went over to his house and he looked at me and he said, "You taught my wife Chinese." English is what he actually said. "You taught my wife English." Turned out he had been recording chapter a day tapes and then sending them to Beijing so that she could listen to spoken English and learn. So how much effort goes into it? A fair amount, depending on how you see it. You have to read a book 4 times minimum. First time to decide whether it's a good book to read. The second, so that you can, as I said, abridge it, edit it, get it down to a point where it's reasonable to broadcast. A third time, before you go into the recording session, just to make sure you have all of the sentences straight in your head. And then the fourth time, of course, to record. Well, I see by my clock that I have hit my 20 minutes or so, and it's time to go. In the studio, there was always a clock saying about the same thing. So I'll just say again, it's been great. Thank you for inviting me to come join you, even if I can't join you in person. I'll look forward to that whenever it happens in the future. It's a pleasure to talk to people who care about the world around them. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer those as well.
So thank you, Jim, for that presentation. And for those interested, we will now move to the live Q&A session via Zoom. So again, you can see the link in the chat or find the link in this morning's email from the Rotary office. I also want to remind members that we seek feedback on our programs each week. Obviously, without feedback, we can't get better, right? I mean, and our goal is continuous improvement. So there is a link in the chat to a very brief survey about today's program. Your feedback is valued. So we also include a link to the speaker survey in each Friday morning's email. So with that, outstanding job, Jim. We look forward to asking you some questions. And thanks to everyone who attended today's meeting. We are adjourned.